If you were a teacher, what would you do if one of your students develops feelings for you? In today's movie recap, a married teacher is struggling to resist temptation from his attractive student. Find out how far this forbidden relationship will go. The movie begins with a girl named Cairo Sweet. She was left alone by her lawyer parents working abroad. Living alone in a Tennessee mansion, writing becomes her escape. Wearing a miniskirt and high socks, she traverses the woods to reach her school. Upon arriving at school, she encounters their class teacher, Jonathan Miller, a middle-aged man who failed being an author, so he turns into teaching. Jonathan is like Cairo's father because of their age difference. However, Cairo secretly admires Jonathan and purposely takes his class. Because Cairo arrived early to class, Jonathan told her to start reading the coverage for the entire semester. He was surprised when Cairo mentioned that she had already read it as their subject involved 12 books. While they were talking, Winnie, a repeating student of Jonathan, suddenly arrived. Winnie is also a close friend of Cairo who immediately invited her to eat. After the two left, the curious Jonathan approached Cairo's desk to inspect the books she was reading. While reading, Boris, Jonathan's friend, arrived, took the book Jonathan was reading, and teased him while reading the explicit content. Jonathan tried to stop him, but Boris persistently continued. One of the things that caught Boris's attention was the book written by Jonathan. Jonathan was also surprised to learn that Cairo had a copy of his book. Upon arriving home, he found his wife, Beatrice, busy on her laptop. He tried to talk to her, but it was evident she was extremely busy. So, he called her directly, excitedly sharing that one of his students was voluntarily reading his book. While they were talking, her colleague Amy interrupted their talk with a call. After the call, Jonathan whispers erotic things in his wife's ear and they drink. The two gets turned on, but when they are about to rodeo, Amy calls again. That is why Jonathan got left hanging. The next day, he recounted it to Boris and said his weekend was not good. Boris then makes fun of him as he shares his experience. While talking in the field, they spotted Cairo walking from the woods. The sexually frustrated Jonathan stares at her as she comes close to them. As she approached them, she took off her earphones and greeted them. The two asked her if she wasn't scared to pass through the woods, and her only response was that she was the scariest thing there. Hearing this, Jonathan laughed. While in the locker room, Winnie pretended to have dropped her belongings. Boris, aware that she did it intentionally, approached her to ask what she needed. It was evident that she was trying to charm Boris because she had a grade issue. Cairo noticed this and told Winnie that she had a lot of nerve. At Cairo's house, the two friends hang out in her room. Cairo is troubled about her college admission because she has to answer a question about her greatest achievement. Unable to think of one, Cairo asks for Winnie's help. Winnie tries to give Cairo ideas, but everything seems too normal. Suddenly, Winnie suggests to Cairo that she should try to charm their teachers and write an essay about it. Confused, Cairo mentions the 20-year age gap between them and questions the idea. However, the flirtatious Winnie continues to convince Cairo that it's normal. She adds that Jonathan seems like a nice and gentle man, making him a good choice for Cairo's first time so that she won't feel any pain. Winnie continues to play with the mind of Cairo, making her more curious about sex. Winnie even points out that she noticed Jonathan's lingering glances at Cairo, which makes her fluttered and embarrassed. Days passed, and Cairo's curiosity about sex continued to grow. It increased to the point where she wanted to experience it. During class, Cairo always gazed at Jonathan, and her desire for him was noticeable. Suddenly, Jonathan comes from behind and whispered to her to go to his office after class. In his office, Jonathan chatted with Boris and invited him to have dinner with his wife. Boris agreed and continued to be playful, dancing before leaving. After Boris left, Jonathan attempted to mimic his dance, and that's when Cairo caught him dancing. They both laughed and proceeded to discuss Winnie. Jonathan was impressed by the friendship they had and continued talking about Cairo's living situation. They sat down and talked about what Cairo had written. Jonathan was so impressed that he memorized it. Cairo felt flattered and delighted to learn that Jonathan paid attention to her. Jonathan wanted Cairo to write another short story, but this time he suggested highlighting her favorite author. If she did this, Jonathan promised to exempt her from the midterm. Jonathan gave Cairo a topic and she immediately accepted. In the midst of their conversation, Cairo suddenly brought up that she had read Jonathan's book. She expressed her liking for it and quoted some content from the book. Jonathan was touched upon hearing this, realizing that his less-known book gained attention. Jonathan invited Cairo to meet over the weekend to discuss the short story further. Later that day, the three of them had dinner while drinking alcohol. At the bar, Winnie approached them to take their orders. After she left, Beatrice asked if Winnie was the student Jonathan was referring to. Jonathan said no, but it is evident that Beatrice is jealous. She began expressing her frustrations to Jonathan, attacking his dreams and humiliating him in front of Boris. On the weekend, Cairo went to their meeting place. While she was looking for Jonathan, he appeared behind her and whispered. He sat beside her and engaged in conversation. Jonathan informed her that they had been doing this for a long time, enhancing their skills in literature. While a man named Elliot was reciting poetry in front, Cairo stole glances at Jonathan, who was attentively listening. Afterward, they discussed Elliot's performance. The two exchanged glances while Cairo smoked. She offered it to Jonathan, and he promptly accepted. The next day, as the friends were talking again in their usual place, Cairo arrived wearing seductive clothes. Boris asked her about it, but Cairo ignored him and brought them coffee. When Boris left, Cairo sat next to Jonathan. The growing closeness between them was noticeable as they playfully teased each other and shared cigarettes. On the way to class, Jonathan received a text from his wife inviting him on a weekend getaway. He was delighted, especially when his wife mentioned that it's his turn to ride her. After class, Cairo immediately approached him to discuss her short story. Jonathan appeared in a hurry, eager to be with his wife, recklessly approves of her writings. After Jonathan left, Winnie played around the classroom. While she was at Jonathan's desk, Boris arrived looking for Jonathan. Instead of telling Boris where Jonathan was, Winnie continued to seduce Boris by placing his cell phone inside her cleavage. Cairo was searching for her phone as it went missing. Meanwhile, Jonathan's plans were repeatedly postponed as Amy kept calling Beatrice. While waiting, Jonathan's phone rang inside his bag. He answered it and was surprised to hear Cairo on the other end. She told Jonathan that she accidentally placed her phone in his bag. The two talked while Jonathan's wife was also on the phone. Frustrated and disappointed that they couldn't have a weekend getaway, Jonathan volunteered to bring Cairo's phone to her house. Jonathan quickly agreed, and Cairo warned him about the incoming rain. While on his way, a heavy downpour suddenly began. Upon arriving, he saw Cairo walking out of his front door wearing a seductive dress. Amidst the rain, Jonathan stood there, and Cairo approached him. The two locked eyes, and due to Jonathan's pent-up passion, they passionately embraced and kissed in the pouring rain. After the intense moment, both of them were left in a daze, with Jonathan's mind seemingly wandering. Suddenly, Cairo sent Jonathan his midterm exam. He snapped out of his daydream as his wife asked him to leave her alone since she was getting distracted. Jonathan left and went to a small house outside their home, staying there. He immediately printed Cairo's finished work and began reading it, captivated by the engaging story with adult content. When it reached the climax of the story, Jonathan became excited as he imagined Cairo in the scene. Eager to satisfy his lust, Jonathan quickly unzipped his pants and played with his sword. The next day, Cairo entered excitedly, wearing a dress to captivate Jonathan even more. However, when she entered, it seemed like Jonathan's attitude had changed. He walked into the classroom and didn't greet her as before. Concerned, Cairo asked him if everything was okay. Jonathan expressed his disappointment with what Cairo had done. In contrast to what he felt about her writing, Jonathan showed that he didn't like it because it contained explicit content and it's inappropriate. Cairo explained that it was about them, but Jonathan continued to reject what she had done. Cairo attempted to explain, but Jonathan wouldn't listen. Once and for all, Jonathan decided to reject both Cairo's paperwork and their relationship. Cairo tried to reveal Jonathan's true feelings, but he insulted her work and regretted trusting her. Hearing this, Cairo had an outburst of anger and insulted Jonathan in return. She says that he cannot do what she did, so he is just envious of her. She then calls his writings mediocre and boring. However, Jonathan stood firm in their relationship as teacher and student, which angers Cairo even more. Cairo became even angrier and dared Jonathan to fail her in the midterm exam. The broken-hearted young student quickly went home and drank with Winnie while crying over Jonathan's betrayal and what he did. Meanwhile, Jonathan returned home in despair and started drinking. Beatrice noticed this and approached her husband, asking about the problem. Initially, Jonathan didn't reveal the issue, but eventually confessed that it involved his student. He said that he was disappointed with the submitted short story because it contained inappropriate content. His wife became curious about its content, so he had him recite it. While Jonathan was quoting its climax, Beatrice became aroused and turned on. She straddled him and kissed him passionately. As they were about to have a good time, Boris suddenly arrived. Jonathan was left hanging again and quickly went to the toilet. Meanwhile, Cairo continued to vent to Winnie, saying that he knew Jonathan was just pretending. Winnie, on the other hand, continued to chat with Boris, who showed no interest in her. She tried to provoke him, but it had no effect. Seeing this, Cairo decided to make out with Winnie with a plan in mind to send it to Boris. The two undressed their tops and took pictures of themselves kissing. Boris received it and immediately excused himself and left. The principal's office then called, and Beatrice handed it to Jonathan. It informed Jonathan that news had reached them about something happening between him and Cairo. Obviously, Jonathan denied it and told his wife that it wasn't true. However, Beatrice threatens him that if it's true, not only could he lose his job, but he might also lose his wife. The next day, Cairo didn't attend class as she was in the principal's office talking to Joyce. During the class, Winnie's sadness was noticeable. After class, she approached Jonathan, describing how important Cairo was to her while shedding tears. However, Jonathan remained unaffected, ignoring her attempts to guilt-trip him. Later on, the vice principal invited both of them to the office for an interview about what happened. The principal interviews Cairo first so that she will know what the right questions to ask Jonathan. Without hiding anything, Cairo reveals everything that happened. When it's Jonathan's turn, he displays uneasiness and guilt. At the end of the interview, Joyce noticed Cairo's consistent statements, so she decided to suspend Jonathan. Upon leaving the office, Boris approached him, expressing his disappointment. Boris warned him to know his boundaries before their conflict escalated, then left to give him space. When Jonathan got home, he reported to Beatrice that he got suspended. Beatrice quickly asked if something happened, but Jonathan denied it. He only mentioned that he gave special privileges to Cairo, which Beatrice didn't buy, continuing to confront Jonathan. She bombards Jonathan with questions until such point that she caught him. When asked Jonathan if he has developed feelings for her, he only stopped and did not deny. The two argued, shouting and insulting each other. The two began to point out each other's shortcomings until they exchanged hurtful words. The pent-up frustrations began to surface as they pointed all out. At the end, Beatrice walks out with plan in her mind to divorce him. Meanwhile, Winnie confronted Cairo about the possibility of Jonathan losing his job because of her. Cairo, unaffected by these concerns, stated that it's her greatest achievement and included it in her college essay. She tells Winnie that Jonathan underestimated her, so she is doing this to get back at him. At the end of the movie, Cairo's essay depicted the potential fate of Jonathan in his marriage, work, and their relationship. As she finished her essay, the movie concluded.